the dusty corners of small-town America, where pickup trucks outnumber people and everyone knows everyone else's business. Some secrets run deeper than the ancient roots of desert mesquite. What happens when two worlds collide? One steeped in tradition and ancestral wisdom, the other built on quiet solitude and simple farming. Sometimes the most unexpected encounters change the course of not just two lives, but entire bloodlines. This is the true story of how a single bold request shattered the peaceful existence of a man who had spent his entire life avoiding attention, and how an Apache woman's determination to preserve her heritage led to one of the most unusual partnerships ever forged in the American Southwest. It's a tale of courage, tradition, unexpected love, and the lengths people will go to honor their ancestors while embracing an uncertain future. What you're about to read challenges everything you think you know about family, duty, and the power of one woman's unwavering resolve to change destiny itself. Marcus Thompson had always preferred the company of his cornfields to that of people. At 35, he had perfected the art of invisible living in the small town of Desert Ridge, Arizona. His modest farm sat on the outskirts of town, surrounded by endless stretches of desert that seemed to swallow sound and secrets alike. The locals knew him as the polite man who sold fresh vegetables at the Saturday market, paid his bills on time, and never caused trouble for anyone. Most mornings, Marcus would wake before dawn to tend his crops, finding peace in the rhythmic tasks that farming demanded. His hands, whether by sun and soil, moved with practiced precision as he checked irrigation lines and examined plants for signs of disease or pest damage. The work suited his quiet nature perfectly. Plants didn't judge, didn't ask uncomfortable questions, and didn't expect him to make small talk at church socials or town meetings. His farmhouse, inherited from his grandfather, stood modest and functional against the vast desert landscape. The white paint had faded to cream over the years, and the wooden porch creaked under his boots each morning as he stepped outside with his first cup of coffee. Inside, the house reflected his practical approach to life, clean, organized, and sparse. No photographs adorned the walls, no decorative items cluttered the surfaces. Marcus had learned long ago that the fewer possessions he accumulated, the fewer questions people asked about his personal life. The town of Desert Ridge itself seemed caught between two worlds. Old ranching families had given way to newer residents seeking affordable housing and wide-open spaces. The main street still featured the same weathered buildings that had served the community for decades. Betty's Diner, Miller's hardware store, the First National Bank with its faded brick facade. But newer developments had sprouted on the town's edges, bringing young families and retirees who appreciated the area's stark beauty and slower pace of life. Marcus navigated this changing landscape with careful precision. He knew exactly which stores to visit during off-peak hours, which routes to take to avoid unnecessary social interaction, and how to time his errands so he rarely encountered more than a handful of people. His social circle consisted mainly of Mr. Chun, who ran the local seed supply store, and Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly widow who occasionally bought vegetables directly from his farm. The arrangement worked perfectly for Marcus, who had structured his entire adult life around avoiding the kind of attention that made him deeply uncomfortable. He had no social media presence, no dating history that anyone in town could recall, and no close friends who might pry into his personal business. His truck, a reliable 15-year-old Ford, transported him between farm and town without drawing notice. His clothing, practical work shirts, worn jeans, and sturdy boots, marked him as just another hard-working farmer trying to make an honest living from difficult land. But Marcus harbored dreams that extended far beyond his carefully controlled existence. In the quiet hours after evening chores, when the desert air finally began to cool and the first stars appeared in the vast sky above, he would sit on his porch and imagine a different life. He pictured children running through his fields, their laughter mixing with the evening wind. He envisioned a partner who understood his love of the land and his need for peaceful mornings. He dreamed of family dinners around a table that had remained empty for too many years. These were dangerous thoughts for a man who had spent so much energy building walls around his heart. Marcus understood that his shyness wasn't just social awkwardness. It was a protective mechanism developed after years of feeling different, misunderstood, and ultimately safer in solitude. Relationships required vulnerability, and vulnerability led to the kind of emotional exposure that made Marcus's chest tighten with anxiety. His farming operation, though small, had begun to earn recognition for its quality produce. Marcus had developed innovative irrigation techniques that allowed him to grow vegetables year-round in the challenging desert climate. His tomatoes, peppers, and herbs commanded premium prices at the farmer's market, and several local restaurants had approached him about becoming a regular supplier. Success in farming came naturally to him. Success in human connection remained an insurmountable challenge. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that his greatest skill lay in nurturing growth and life. Yet he had spent his adult years avoiding the human connections that might lead to creating life of his own. He watched other farmers at the market with their families, observed customers who shopped in pairs or groups, and felt the familiar ache of loneliness that he had learned to suppress during daylight hours. Desert Ridge's Native American population maintained a respectful but separate existence from the town's newer residents. The Apache reservation bordered the town to the east, and while there was no hostility between communities, there was little interaction beyond basic commerce and civic obligations. Marcus had observed this dynamic without really thinking about it. Social boundaries were something he understood instinctively, having erected so many of his own. On the reservation, life moved according to different rhythms and priorities. Traditional ceremonies marked the seasons, extended families gathered for important decisions, and the wisdom of elders guided younger generations in maintaining connections to ancestral ways of life. These traditions had survived centuries of challenge and change, adapting when necessary, but never abandoning their essential character. Marcus knew none of this intimate detail about reservation life, but he had developed a deep respect for the Apache community's ability to maintain their distinct identity while navigating the complexities of modern American life. During his rare trips to the larger town of Flagstaff for farming supplies, he had occasionally encountered Apache families and had been struck by the quiet dignity and strong family bonds that seemed to characterize their interactions. His own family history offered few models for the kind of close relationships he observed in others. His parents had divorced when he was 12, each remarrying and starting new families that had little room for a shy, awkward stepson. His grandfather, the original owner of the farm, had been a kind but emotionally distant man who expressed affection through practical lessons about crop rotation and soil management rather than words of encouragement or physical affection. This background had left Marcus with excellent farming skills, but limited knowledge about building intimate relationships with other human beings. He understood the delicate balance required to help plants thrive, but the emotional needs of potential romantic partners remained mysterious and intimidating. His few attempts at dating during his 20s had ended awkwardly, leaving him more convinced than ever that solitary life suited him best. Yet lately, As he approached his mid-30s, the silence of his farmhouse had begun to feel less like peaceful sanctuary and more like self-imposed exile. The dreams of children and partnership had become more frequent and more vivid. Marcus found himself lingering at the farmer's market, watching families interact and wondering what it would feel like to belong to something larger than his individual existence. He had begun to consider the possibility that his careful isolation might be depriving him of experiences that could bring meaning and joy to his life. But the gap between wanting connection and actually pursuing it remained vast. Marcus had no idea how to bridge that distance, no roadmap for transitioning from hermit farmer to potential husband and father. The desert around his farm held ancient secrets and had witnessed countless human dramas over the centuries. Apache families had lived on this land for generations before European settlers arrived. Their descendants still maintained connections to these ancestral places, understanding the desert's rhythms and respecting its power in ways that newer residents rarely comprehended. Marcus sensed this deeper history when he walked his fields in the early morning hours, feeling connected to something larger than his immediate concerns about irrigation schedules and crop yields. The land itself seemed to pulse with stories and possibilities that extended far beyond his personal experience. Sometimes, standing in his fields as the sun rose over the distant mountains, he felt almost ready to step outside his carefully constructed boundaries and embrace whatever changes might come. He had no way of knowing that change was already approaching his farm, carried by a woman whose own dreams and determination would soon collide with his quiet existence in ways that would transform both their lives forever. The desert wind that rustled his corn stalks on that particular October evening carried more than the scent of cooling earth and distant rain. It carried the seeds of a future that neither Marcus nor the approaching stranger could yet imagine. As he completed his evening chores and prepared for another solitary night in his farmhouse, Marcus felt the familiar mixture of contentment and longing that had become his constant companion. Tomorrow would bring another day of productive work and careful solitude. He had no reason to expect that tomorrow would also bring the most challenging and life-changing conversation of his entire existence. Elena Yazzie had always been different from other women in her community, though she wore that difference like armor rather than burden. At 28, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never questioned her own worth or purpose. Her grandmother had named her for a star that appeared on the night of her birth, and Elena had spent her life trying to live up to that celestial brightness. Unlike many of her peers who had married young and started families early, Elena had chosen a different path. She had earned a degree in environmental science from Northern Arizona University, returning to the reservation with knowledge that bridged traditional Apache wisdom about the land with modern conservation techniques. Her work with the Tribal Environmental Department had earned respect from both elders and younger community members who saw her as a bridge between old and new ways of approaching their relationship with the natural world. But Elena's greatest passion lay not in her professional achievements, but in her role as keeper of family traditions and bloodline history. She was the last in her family line to carry certain ceremonial responsibilities that had been passed down through generations of Apache women. Her grandmother, the revered medicine woman Sarah Yazzie, had spent Elena's childhood teaching her the songs, stories, and rituals that connected their family to ancestors stretching back centuries. The weight of this responsibility had shaped every major decision in Elena's life. While her friends dated, married, and started families, Elena had focused on mastering the complex knowledge systems that her grandmother insisted she must preserve. She learned to identify medicinal plants by touch in complete darkness, memorized genealogies that traced family connections across multiple Apache bands, and absorbed the intricate protocols that governed ceremonial practices essential to her people's spiritual health. Sarah Yazzie had been clear about one crucial requirement for preserving their family's ceremonial legacy. Elena must have children to carry the knowledge forward. But not just any children would suffice. Apache traditions demanded that ceremonial knowledge be passed through bloodlines that maintained specific characteristics and spiritual qualities that had been carefully preserved for generations. Elena's grandmother had died the previous spring, but not before extracting a promise that would fundamentally alter Elena's life trajectory. On her deathbed, Sarah had gripped Elena's hand with surprising strength and whispered words that had haunted Elena ever since. "The bloodline must continue, granddaughter. You must find a way to have children who can carry what we have protected. The old ways of finding a husband from our people will not work for you. Too many of our young men have lost their connection to the land. You must look beyond traditional boundaries." These words had confused and troubled Elena for months. How could she honor her grandmother's dying wish while respecting the cultural boundaries that had always governed her people's approach to marriage and family formation? The Apache community valued tradition and continuity, but they also understood adaptation and survival. Elena's grandmother had clearly been suggesting something unprecedented, that Elena should consider options beyond the usual practice of marrying within the Apache community. The revelation had come gradually as Elena spent months studying her family's genealogical records and consulting with other elders about her ceremonial obligations. She discovered that her family line carried responsibilities that extended beyond typical ceremonial roles. They were guardians of specific knowledge about desert medicinal plants, keepers of songs that could call rain during drought years, and maintainers of rituals that helped ensure the continued fertility of the land itself. More importantly, Elena learned that this knowledge could only be transmitted to children who possessed particular spiritual sensitivities that seemed to run in certain bloodlines. Her grandmother had possessed these gifts, as had her great-grandmother and the women before her. But Elena's generation faced a unique challenge. Most of the men in their community who might have carried compatible bloodlines had either married outside the community or had lost their connection to traditional ways of life through military service, urban employment, or substance abuse problems that plagued many reservation communities. Elena's research had led her to an uncomfortable but undeniable conclusion. To fulfill her obligations to preserve her family's ceremonial legacy, she would need to have children with someone who possessed the right combination of spiritual sensitivity, connection to the land, and respect for traditional ways of life, even if that person was an Apache. This realization had sent Elena on a months-long quest to identify potential fathers for the children she needed to have. She had observed men throughout the region, attending farmers markets, community events, and intertribal gatherings with the focused attention of someone conducting essential research. She needed someone who demonstrated obvious skill at nurturing growing things, someone whose presence felt calm and grounded, someone who respected the natural world and understood the patience required to work with rather than against natural forces. Elena's search had eventually brought her to the Desert Ridge Farmers Market, where she had observed Marcus Thompson from a distance for several weeks. Something about his careful attention to his plants, his gentle interactions with customers, and his obvious discomfort with social situations had caught her attention. She had made discreet inquiries about his background, learning about his grandfather's successful farming operation and his own innovations in desert agriculture. More importantly, Elena had spent time near his farm, observing from respectful distances as Marcus went about his daily routines. She had noted how animals seemed comfortable around him, how his crops flourished despite challenging conditions, and how the land itself seemed to respond positively to his presence. These were the signs her grandmother had taught her to recognize in someone who possessed the kind of spiritual connection to growing things that would complement her family's ceremonial responsibilities. Elena understood that what she was contemplating would shock both communities. Apache traditions had always emphasized marriage within cultural boundaries, just as Marcus's farming community would likely struggle to understand a partnership based on spiritual and practical compatibility rather than romantic love. But Elena's obligations to preserve her family's ceremonial legacy outweighed conventional social expectations. She had spent weeks developing a plan for approaching Marcus with her unusual proposal. Elena understood that simply appearing at his farm and announcing her intentions would likely terrify him into complete retreat. Instead, she had decided to begin with small interactions at the farmer's market, gradually building familiarity before revealing the true purpose of her interest. But as Elena observed Marcus more closely, she realized that his shyness and social anxiety ran deeper than she had initially recognized. He seemed to actively avoid conversation with anyone beyond the minimal exchanges required for commercial transactions. His body language suggested someone who had learned to fear unexpected social interaction rather than simply prefer solitude. This observation had forced Elena to reconsider her gradual approach. Marcus's protective isolation might make it impossible to develop the kind of natural familiarity she had planned to establish. She might need to be more direct than she had originally intended, even if directness risked frightening him away entirely. Elena's own personality inclined toward forthright communication rather than subtle manipulation. In her professional life, she had learned to present complex information clearly and persuasively. Her grandmother had trained her to speak with authority when conducting ceremonies or sharing traditional knowledge. Elena possessed natural leadership qualities that made her comfortable taking initiative when situations required decisive action. The decision to approach Marcus directly had crystallized on a Tuesday evening in late October. Elena had been sitting in her grandmother's kitchen, surrounded by the bundles of medicinal herbs, ceremonial objects, and genealogical records that represented centuries of accumulated family wisdom. The responsibility of preserving this knowledge for future generations had never felt more pressing or more personal. Elena understood that she was contemplating something unprecedented in her family's history, but unprecedented didn't necessarily mean wrong. Apache culture had always emphasized adaptation and survival. Her ancestors had successfully navigated countless challenges by remaining flexible in their strategies while maintaining firm commitments to essential values and responsibilities. Having children with Marcus Thompson would serve the essential value of preserving ceremonial knowledge while adapting to contemporary realities that made traditional marriage options problematic. Elena felt confident that her grandmother would approve of this creative solution to an otherwise impossible situation. She had spent that evening preparing for the conversation she knew she needed to have with Marcus. Elena gathered documentation that would help explain her family's ceremonial responsibilities, including photographs of her grandmother conducting healing rituals and copies of genealogical records that traced their family's spiritual obligations back through multiple generations. She wanted to be able to prove that her proposal stemmed from genuine spiritual and cultural needs rather than personal whim or romantic delusion. Elena also prepared herself emotionally for the possibility that Marcus might reject her proposal entirely. She understood that asking a virtual stranger to father children based on spiritual compatibility rather than romantic love represented a significant request that most people would find overwhelming or inappropriate. But Elena's obligations to preserve her family's legacy outweighed the discomfort of potential rejection. The drive to Marcus's farm had given Elena time to rehearse her approach one final time. She intended to be completely honest about her intentions, while respecting his right to decline her proposal. Elena would explain her family's ceremonial obligations, describe the specific qualities she had observed in Marcus that made him a suitable potential partner, and offer him time to consider her proposal without pressure or manipulation. Elena had also prepared to address the practical concerns that Marcus would likely raise about their cultural differences and the unconventional nature of their potential partnership. She had researched legal frameworks that would protect both parties' interests and had consulted with tribal elders about protocols for incorporating non-Apache partners into ceremonial activities when such partnerships serve the greater good of preserving traditional knowledge. As Elena's truck approached Marcus's farm on that October evening, she felt the same mixture of determination and nervousness that had sustained her through other significant challenges in her life. This conversation would either open the door to fulfilling her most important obligations to her family and ancestors, or it would force her to continue searching for alternative solutions to an increasingly urgent problem. The desert landscape around Marcus's farm reflected the same austere beauty that characterized the reservation where Elena had grown up. Both communities lived in harmony with harsh but magnificent terrain that demanded respect, patience, and practical wisdom from anyone hoping to thrive there. Elena took this geographic similarity as a positive sign that cultural differences between herself and Marcus might prove less significant than the shared values required to succeed in this challenging environment. As she parked her truck near Marcus's farmhouse and prepared to walk to his front door, Elena offered a brief prayer to her grandmother's spirit, asking for guidance and strength for the conversation ahead. She carried with her the hopes of generations of Apache women who had successfully preserved sacred knowledge through periods of tremendous change and challenge. Elena intended to continue that tradition of successful adaptation, even if it meant forging an entirely new kind of partnership to accomplish her goals. Marcus had been cleaning his tools in the barn when he heard the truck approaching. The sound of tires on gravel at this hour, while past sunset, was unusual enough to make him pause and listen carefully. He received few visitors during daylight hours and virtually none after dark. His immediate reaction was concern that something might be wrong with one of his elderly neighbors who occasionally sought his help with various problems. Setting down the irrigation equipment he had been maintaining, Marcus walked cautiously toward the front of his property. The approaching headlights belonged to a pickup truck he didn't recognize, though the vehicle's practical design suggested it belonged to someone familiar with rural living rather than a lost tourist or unwelcome intruder. Elena had parked near the farmhouse and was walking toward the front porch when Marcus emerged from the barn. Even in the dim light cast by his porch fixture, he could see that his visitor was a woman of approximately his own age, moving with confident strides that suggested she had specific business to conduct rather than casual social intentions. "Mr. Thompson?" Elena called out as she approached. Her voice carried clearly across the desert air, steady and respectful, but without the hesitant quality that Marcus associated with most unexpected visitors. "Yes, that's me," Marcus replied, stopping several yards from the porch. His natural caution made him reluctant to move closer until he understood the purpose of this unexpected visit. "Is there something I can help you with? Is everything all right?" Elena had anticipated Marcus's wariness and appreciated his careful approach to unexpected situations. "My name is Elena Yazzie. I live on the reservation east of town. I've been wanting to speak with you about something important, and I hope you could spare a few minutes for conversation." The mention of the reservation surprised Marcus, who had very limited contact with the Apache community despite their proximity to his farm. He knew Elena's last name suggested she was likely Apache, but her professional manner and obvious education indicated someone comfortable navigating multiple cultural contexts. "Of course," Marcus said, though his confusion was evident in his voice. "Would you like to come inside? I can make coffee if you'd prefer to sit down for whatever this is about." Elena appreciated his offer of hospitality, recognizing it as evidence of the kind of natural courtesy that had informed her decision to approach him. "That would be helpful. Thank you. What I need to discuss is rather complex, and I think we'll both be more comfortable sitting down." Marcus led Elena into his farmhouse, acutely aware that the modest interior reflected his solitary lifestyle. The living room contained functional furniture arranged around a stone fireplace, with bookshelves filled with agricultural texts and technical manuals. Elena seemed to take in the details of his home with interest rather than judgment, noting the cleanliness and organization that suggested someone who took pride in maintaining his personal environment. "Coffee or tea?" Marcus asked as Elena settled into the chair he had indicated. "I also have water or juice if you prefer something cold." "Coffee would be fine, thank you," Elena replied. She used the time while Marcus prepared beverages to organize her thoughts and observe more details about his home that might inform their conversation. The kitchen, visible through the doorway, showed the same attention to cleanliness and order, with herbs growing in pots on the windowsill and fresh vegetables from his garden arranged in baskets on the counter. Marcus returned with 2 mugs of coffee and settled into the chair across from Elena, still puzzled about the purpose of her visit, but willing to listen to whatever had brought her to his farm after dark. "So what can I help you with, Ms. Yazzie?" Elena took a sip of her coffee, noting that Marcus had prepared it properly and served it in clean mugs that showed respect for his guest. These small courtesies reinforced her conviction that she had chosen wisely in approaching him about her proposal. "Mr. Thompson, what I'm going to tell you may sound unusual, but I hope you'll hear me out completely before making any judgments," Elena began. "I've been observing your work at the farmer's market and around your farm for several weeks, and I believe you might be someone who could help me solve a significant problem." Marcus felt his anxiety level increase at the mention of being observed, but he managed to keep his voice steady as he responded. "What kind of problem?" Elena had rehearsed this explanation multiple times, but sitting across from Marcus in his quiet living room, she realized that no amount of preparation could make her proposal sound entirely conventional. She decided to begin with the cultural context that would help Marcus understand why she was approaching him with such an unusual request. "My grandmother was a medicine woman in our community," Elena said. "Before she died last spring, she passed certain ceremonial responsibilities to me that have been maintained by women in our family for many generations. These responsibilities include preserving specific knowledge about healing plants, conducting rituals that help ensure fertility of the land, and maintaining songs and stories that connect our people to our ancestors." Marcus nodded, though he wasn't sure how his farming operation related to Apache ceremonial traditions. "That sounds like important work. I'm sorry for the loss of your grandmother." "Thank you," Elena replied. "The challenge I face is that these ceremonial responsibilities can only be passed to my own children, and Those children need to possess certain spiritual qualities that seem to run in particular bloodlines. My grandmother made me promise to have children who could carry this knowledge forward, but the traditional ways of finding a suitable husband within our community aren't working for me. Elena paused to gauge Marcus's reaction to this information. His expression showed confusion, but not hostility or alarm, which encouraged her to continue with her explanation. I've spent months researching this problem and consulting with other elders about possible solutions, Elena continued. What I've learned is that the spiritual qualities necessary for preserving our family's ceremonial knowledge can exist in people from different cultural backgrounds, particularly people who demonstrate natural abilities to work with growing things and maintain harmonious relationships with the land. Marcus was beginning to sense where this conversation might be heading, but the implication seemed so unlikely that he hesitated to voice his suspicions. I'm not sure I understand how this relates to me, Ms. Yazzie. Elena set down her coffee mug and leaned forward slightly, meeting Marcus's eyes with steady confidence. Mr. Thompson, I've been observing you because you demonstrate exactly the qualities that my grandmother taught me to recognize in someone who could help preserve our family's ceremonial legacy. You have obvious skill at nurturing growing things. You maintain a respectful relationship with the natural world, and you possess the kind of calm presence that suggests spiritual sensitivity to the forces that govern healthy growth. The silence that followed Elena's explanation stretched several moments while Marcus processed what he had just heard. His mind raced through possible interpretations of her words, settling reluctantly on the conclusion that seemed most consistent with her careful observations of his farming practices. "Are you suggesting," Marcus said slowly, "that you want me to father children with you so that they can preserve your family's ceremonial knowledge?" Elena nodded, relieved that Marcus had understood her proposal without requiring more explicit explanation. "That's exactly what I'm suggesting. I know it sounds unusual, but I'm not talking about a conventional marriage or even a romantic relationship. I'm talking about a practical partnership focused on having children who can carry forward important cultural knowledge that would otherwise be lost." Marcus felt his chest tighten with the familiar anxiety that accompanied unexpected social situations. But this request far exceeded anything his previous experience had prepared him to handle. "Ms. Yazzie, I have to say that I've never been approached with anything like this before. I'm not sure what to think about it." "I understand that it's a lot to consider," Elena replied. "I wouldn't have made this proposal if I hadn't spent considerable time researching my options and observing your character. I believe you're someone who takes seriously the responsibility of nurturing growing things, whether they're crops or children. I also believe you're someone who would respect the cultural significance of what I'm trying to preserve." Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his fields while he tried to process Elena's proposal. The practical farmer in him appreciated her straightforward approach to solving a complex problem, but the shy man who had spent his adult life avoiding complicated relationships felt overwhelmed by the implications of what she was suggesting. "Can I ask why you chose me specifically?" Marcus said, turning back to face Elena. "Surely there are other people who work with plants and understand farming." Elena had anticipated this question and had prepared an honest answer that she hoped would help Marcus understand her reasoning without feeling pressured or manipulated. "I observed several farmers and gardeners in the area," Elena explained. "What set you apart was the combination of technical skill with something harder to define, a quality of presence that suggests you understand working with natural forces rather than against them. I also noticed that animals seem comfortable around you, which my grandmother taught me to recognize as evidence of someone who possesses natural harmony with living systems." Elena paused before continuing with the more personal observations that had influenced her decision. I also noticed that you seem to be someone who values solitude and careful decision-making rather than impulsive action. Those are qualities that would serve well in raising children who need to learn patience and respect for traditional knowledge. Marcus returned to his chair, still struggling to process the magnitude of what Elena was proposing. Ms. Yazzie, I appreciate that you've given this careful consideration, but I have to be honest, I don't have any experience with relationships or children. I'm not sure I would be suitable for what you're describing. Actually, your lack of conventional relationship experience might be an advantage, Elena replied. What I'm proposing isn't a conventional relationship. It's a partnership focused on specific goals that we both value. You wouldn't need to navigate the usual complications of romantic relationships because our partnership would be based on mutual respect and shared commitment to raising children who can preserve important cultural knowledge. Elena reached into the bag she had brought and removed several photographs and documents that she had prepared to support her proposal. I brought some materials that might help you understand what I'm asking and why it matters to my people. Marcus examined the photographs Elena handed him, seeing images of her grandmother conducting ceremonies, healing sick community members, and teaching young people about medicinal plants. The dignity and obvious spiritual power of the elderly Apache woman in the photographs helped Marcus understand that Elena's proposal stemmed from genuine cultural obligations rather than personal whim. Your grandmother looks like she was an impressive woman, Marcus said, returning the photographs to Elena. She was extraordinary, Elena agreed, and she made me promise to find a way to preserve what she spent her lifetime protecting. Having children with you would honor that promise while giving those children the benefit of growing up with a father who understands the importance of nurturing growing things. Marcus felt pulled between his natural inclination to avoid complicated situations and his growing recognition that Elena was offering him something he had dreamed about, but never dared to pursue: the possibility of having children and participating in something larger than his isolated existence. If I were to consider this, Marcus said carefully, what exactly would be expected of me? I mean, beyond the obvious biological contribution. Elena smiled for the first time since beginning their conversation, recognizing Marcus's question as evidence that he was taking her proposal seriously rather than dismissing it immediately. I would want you to be a real father to any children we might have, Elena explained. They would need to learn about both sides of their heritage, your knowledge about farming and working with the land, and my family's ceremonial responsibilities. I believe children benefit from having involved fathers, and I think you have qualities that would make you an excellent parent. The conversation continued past midnight as Elena answered Marcus's questions about practical arrangements, cultural protocols, and the specific ceremonial knowledge that their children would be expected to preserve. Marcus found himself increasingly intrigued by Elena's intelligence, her obvious devotion to preserving her family's legacy, and her respectful approach to addressing his concerns and limitations. When Elena finally prepared to leave, Marcus walked her to her truck, still uncertain about his response, but deeply moved by the trust she had placed in him by sharing her family's most important obligations. How long do I have to think about this? Marcus asked as Elena opened her truck door. Take whatever time you need, Elena replied. But I hope you'll consider that sometimes the most important decisions we make involve stepping outside our comfort zones to serve something larger than ourselves. As Elena's truck disappeared into the desert darkness, Marcus remained standing in his yard, looking up at the star-filled sky and wondering if his carefully ordered life was about to change in ways he had never imagined possible. The 3 days following Elena's visit passed like a strange dream for Marcus. He continued his normal farming routines, checking irrigation systems, harvesting vegetables for the weekend market, maintaining equipment in the barn, but his mind remained fixed on their extraordinary conversation. Elena's proposal had awakened possibilities that Marcus had buried so deeply he had almost forgotten they existed. Sleep came fitfully as Marcus wrestled with questions that had no clear answers. Could he really become a father to children whose cultural heritage he barely understood? Did Elena's practical approach to partnership offer him the family life he had always craved, or would it create complications that his anxiety-prone personality couldn't handle? Most troubling of all, what if he agreed to Elena's proposal, but proved inadequate as both partner and parent? During his morning chores on Thursday, Marcus found himself imagining children running through his fields, learning to identify different vegetables and understand the cycles of planting and harvest. The image felt both thrilling and terrifying. Thrilling because it represented the family connection he had always desired. Terrifying because it demanded emotional risks that challenged everything about his carefully controlled existence. Marcus had always found clarity in physical work, so he decided to tackle the most demanding project on his autumn task list: rebuilding the stone retaining wall that protected his vegetable garden from desert flooding during monsoon season. The work required careful attention to fitting irregularly shaped stones together in patterns that would withstand both weight and weather. As he moved methodically from one section of wall to the next, Marcus realized that Elena's proposal shared characteristics with his stonework. It involved fitting different elements together to create something stronger and more enduring than either component could achieve alone. By Friday morning, Marcus had reached a tentative conclusion that surprised him with its clarity. Elena's proposal offered him the possibility of meaningful partnership and fatherhood without the romantic complications that had always made conventional relationships feel overwhelming. Her direct approach to defining expectations and responsibilities appealed to his preference for clear communication over emotional guesswork. Most importantly, her obvious intelligence and dedication suggested that any children they might have together would benefit from her guidance and cultural knowledge. But Marcus also recognized that accepting Elena's proposal would require him to develop new capabilities as both partner and parent. He would need to learn about Apache culture, ceremonial traditions, and child-rearing practices that differed significantly from his own limited experience. The prospect of such extensive personal growth felt daunting, but also exciting in ways that Marcus hadn't experienced since his early years of learning farming techniques from his grandfather. The Saturday farmers market provided Marcus with an unexpected opportunity to observe Elena in her natural environment. She appeared at his vegetable stand around mid-morning, purchasing tomatoes and peppers with the same friendly efficiency she had demonstrated during their conversation. But Marcus noticed other customers watching Elena with obvious respect, and he heard several people address her by name and inquire about her environmental work on the reservation. Elena's presence at the market allowed Marcus to see her interacting naturally with various people, demonstrating the social skills and community connections that complemented her professional achievements. She moved through the market with confident familiarity, stopping to chat with other vendors and customers in ways that suggested someone who enjoyed human interaction rather than merely tolerating it for practical purposes. After completing her purchases, Elena approached Marcus's stand one final time, ostensibly to ask about his plans for winter vegetable varieties, but actually to gauge his emotional state following their midweek conversation. "Have you given more thought to our discussion?" Elena asked quietly, after other customers had moved beyond hearing range. "I have," Marcus replied, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. I think I would like to try what you're suggesting, but I have some concerns about whether I can be the kind of partner and father you need. Elena felt a surge of relief and excitement at Marcus's tentative acceptance, but she maintained her careful approach to avoid pressuring him toward a decision he might later regret. What concerns you most? I don't know anything about Apache culture or ceremonial traditions, Marcus said. I'm worried that I might inadvertently do something inappropriate or fail to understand important aspects of what our children would need to learn. Elena had anticipated this concern and had already begun developing strategies for addressing Marcus's cultural education. Learning about cultural traditions is something we could work on together. I would need to teach our children about their Apache heritage anyway, and having you learn alongside them might actually strengthen those lessons. Marcus nodded, encouraged by Elena's practical approach to his limitations. I'm also concerned about the basic mechanics of partnership. I've lived alone for so long that I'm not sure I know how to share space and decisions with another person. We don't need to live in the same house, Elena replied. We could maintain separate homes while sharing responsibility for raising children. That might actually work better for preserving different aspects of their cultural education. The conversation continued through several more practical questions about financial responsibilities, legal arrangements, and timelines for beginning their partnership. Marcus found Elena's systematic approach to addressing his concerns both reassuring and attractive. She had clearly thought through most of the logistics that worried him, and her solution seemed designed to respect his need for gradual adjustment while ensuring that their children's needs would be met. If we decide to move forward, Marcus said, how do we begin? Elena smiled at the shift in Marcus's language from hypothetical consideration to practical planning. We probably should spend more time together so we could develop better understanding of each other's personalities and daily routines. We don't need to be romantically involved, but we should be comfortable with each other as people if we're going to raise children together. Marcus agreed with this logic, though the prospect of increased social interaction with anyone, even Elena, activated his familiar anxieties about performance and judgment. Would you be willing to visit my farm regularly so I can show you how I manage my crops? I think you should understand what our children would be learning about farming and working with the land. I would enjoy that, Elena replied. And I could take you to some places on the reservation so you can begin learning about Apache traditions and seeing how I live my daily life. They arranged for Elena to visit Marcus's farm the following Tuesday evening, and for Marcus to accompany Elena to a traditional Apache gathering schedule for the following weekend. Both commitments represented significant steps outside their respective comfort zones, but both recognized that successful partnership would require mutual understanding that could only develop through shared experience. As Elena prepared to leave the farmer's market, she turned back to Marcus with an expression that mixed gratitude with determination. I want you to know how much I appreciate your willingness to consider this partnership. I know it's asking a lot of you to step into something so different from anything you've experienced before. Actually, Marcus replied, I think you might be offering me something I've wanted my whole life, but never knew how to pursue. I've always dreamed of having a family, but I never thought I could navigate the social complexities of conventional relationships. Your approach makes it seem possible in ways that feel manageable to me. Elena's second visit to Marcus's farm took place on a Tuesday evening when the October air had begun carrying hints of the cooler weather that would soon arrive in the desert. Marcus had spent the afternoon preparing for her visit by organizing his thoughts about farming techniques that might interest someone with Elena's environmental science background. Elena arrived as the sun was setting, casting golden light across Marcus's fields and creating the perfect conditions for the agricultural tour he had planned. Marcus felt more confident on his own property, surrounded by the crops and systems he understood completely. His natural shyness diminished as he began explaining his innovative irrigation methods and organic pest management strategies. "Your water conservation techniques are impressive," Elena observed as Marcus showed her the drip irrigation system he had designed to minimize water waste while maximizing crop nutrition. These approaches align well with traditional Apache farming methods that emphasized working with natural water cycles rather than trying to overcome them. Marcus felt encouraged by Elena's professional assessment of his farming operation, particularly her ability to connect his techniques with traditional Apache knowledge. "I'd be interested to learn more about traditional Apache farming. I imagine your ancestors developed sophisticated strategies for growing food in this climate." "They did," Elena confirmed. "And I think our children would benefit from learning both modern and traditional approaches to working with the land. Your innovations could enhance traditional methods, while traditional knowledge might offer new perspectives on managing your crops." As they walked through Marcus's fields in the gathering darkness, both began to envision practical ways their different knowledge systems could complement each other in educating children who would inherit responsibilities from both sides of their heritage. Marcus's systematic approach to problem-solving in agriculture seemed compatible with Elena's ceremonial obligations to preserve traditional ecological knowledge. Elena's visit concluded with coffee in Marcus's kitchen, where they discussed more personal aspects of their potential partnership. Elena shared stories about her childhood with her grandmother, describing the patient process of learning ceremonial songs and the gradual development of understanding about medicinal plants. Marcus talked about his grandfather's influence on his farming practices and his own discovery of satisfaction in nurturing growing things. "I think we have more in common than might be obvious at first glance," Elena observed. "We both learned important skills from grandparents. We both find meaning in working with natural systems. And we both seem to value patience and careful observation over rushed decisions." Marcus nodded, recognizing the truth of Elena's assessment. "I'm beginning to think that raising children together might teach me things about myself that I would never discover on my own." The following weekend, Marcus accompanied Elena to a community gathering on the reservation, where he experienced Apache social traditions for the first time. The event featured traditional foods, ceremonial dances, and informal conversations among families who had known each other for generations. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the social intensity, but also moved by the obvious affection and mutual support that characterized interactions within Elena's community. Elena introduced Marcus to several elders and community leaders, explaining their developing partnership in terms that emphasize their shared commitment to preserving important knowledge rather than romantic attraction. The responses Marcus received ranged from curious interest to cautious acceptance, but no one treated him with hostility or suspicion. "Your community seems very close-knit," Marcus observed as Elena drove him home after the gathering. "We have to be," Elena replied. "Preserving our culture requires everyone to take responsibility for teaching younger generations and supporting each other through challenges. I hope our children will grow up feeling connected to both communities, your farming neighbors and my Apache relatives." By early November, Marcus and Elena had established a comfortable routine of regular visits and shared activities that allowed them to develop mutual understanding without the pressure of romantic expectations. Marcus had begun reading books about Apache history and culture, while Elena had started learning about advanced farming techniques that could enhance traditional agricultural methods. Both had also consulted with healthcare providers about the medical aspects of their partnership, legal advisors about protecting their respective interests, and family members about their unconventional decision. Elena's aunt, who served as an unofficial elder advisor since her grandmother's death, had expressed cautious approval of Elena's plan to preserve ceremonial knowledge through partnership with a non-Apache man who demonstrated appropriate respect for traditional ways of life. Marcus's only close relative, a cousin who lived in Phoenix, had expressed surprise at Marcus's decision to start a family, but also pleasure at the prospect of his finally developing meaningful personal connections. "I always worried that you were too isolated out there on that farm," his cousin had said. "This Elena sounds like she might be exactly what you need to build the life you've always wanted." On the evening when Marcus and Elena formally agreed to begin trying to have children together, they sealed their partnership with a ceremony that Elena had designed to honor both Apache traditions and Marcus's farming background. The ceremony took place in Marcus's fields under a full moon, with Elena offering prayers to her ancestors and Marcus making commitments about nurturing and protecting any children they might have. The formalization of their partnership felt both solemn and celebratory to both participants. Elena felt relief at finally beginning the process of fulfilling her grandmother's dying wish, while Marcus felt excitement about embarking on the family life he had always dreamed of but never thought possible. As they walked back to Marcus's farmhouse after the ceremony, both recognized that they were beginning an experiment in partnership that would require continued patience, flexibility, and mutual respect. But both also felt confident that their shared values and complementary strengths provided a solid foundation for raising children who could bridge different cultural traditions while preserving important knowledge for future generations. Spring arrived early in the desert that year, bringing with it news that would transform both Marcus and Elena's lives forever. Elena's pregnancy was confirmed in late February, just 4 months after they had begun their partnership. Both had hoped their plan would succeed, but the reality of impending parenthood brought a mixture of joy, excitement, and new anxieties that neither had fully anticipated. Marcus received the news while working in his greenhouse, preparing seedlings for the spring planting season. Elena had called him from the medical clinic on the reservation, her voice carrying a combination of happiness and nervousness that immediately captured his complete attention. "The test was positive," Elena said simply. "We're going to have a baby." Marcus sat down heavily on a nearby stool, feeling his legs weaken as the magnitude of Elena's announcement registered fully. After months of hoping and planning, they had created new life that would carry forward both Elena's ceremonial responsibilities and his own dreams of fatherhood. "Are you feeling all right?" Marcus asked, his practical nature immediately focusing on Elena's well-being. "Do you need anything? Should I drive over to see you?" Elena smiled at Marcus's immediate concern for her health and comfort. "I'm feeling fine, just a little tired. Why don't you come for dinner tonight, and we can talk about what happens next." The drive to Elena's house on the reservation gave Marcus time to process his emotions about becoming a father. The shy farmer who had lived in isolation for so many years was about to become responsible for helping raise a child who would need to learn about both Apache ceremonial traditions and modern farming techniques. The responsibility felt overwhelming and exhilarating in equal measure. Elena's home reflected her dual identity as both traditional Apache woman and modern environmental professional. Native American artwork and ceremonial objects shared space with scientific books and computer equipment. The kitchen garden behind her house featured traditional Apache plants alongside modern vegetables, creating exactly the kind of cultural bridge that their child would need to navigate successfully. "I've been thinking about names," Elena said as she and Marcus shared a simple dinner of traditional Apache foods and vegetables from his farm. Apache traditions suggest that children should have names that reflect both their spiritual qualities and their family responsibilities. "I like to choose names that honor your family heritage as well as mine." Marcus felt moved by Elena's consideration for including his family background in their child's identity. "I don't have strong opinions about names, but I would appreciate having our child connected to both sides of their heritage. What kinds of names are you considering?" Elena had prepared a list of possibilities that reflected her research into both Apache naming traditions and Marcus's family history. "If we have a daughter, I like the name Sarah, after my grandmother, with the Apache name Desba, which means goes to war. If we have a son, I was thinking about Thomas, after your grandfather, with the Apache name Ahiga, which means he fights." The names Elena suggested reflected her understanding that their child would need strength and determination to successfully preserve traditional knowledge while navigating the complexities of modern American life. Marcus appreciated the thoughtfulness Elena had invested in connecting their child to both family traditions. "Those names feel right to me," Marcus said. "I like that they honor our grandparents while giving our child strong spiritual foundations." As Elena's pregnancy progressed through the spring and summer months, both she and Marcus adapted their lives to accommodate the growing reality of impending parenthood. Elena modified her work schedule to reduce physical demands while continuing her environmental research projects. Marcus expanded his greenhouse operation to include medicinal plants that Elena needed for traditional healing preparations. The two households began to function as an extended family unit, with Elena spending several evenings each week at Marcus's farm and Marcus participating regularly in community events on the reservation. Both communities gradually accepted their unconventional partnership, particularly as neighbors observed the obvious respect and consideration that characterized their interactions. Marcus's farming neighbors had initially viewed his relationship with Elena with curious uncertainty, but they began to appreciate Elena's scientific knowledge about soil conservation and water management. Elena's environmental expertise complemented Marcus's practical farming experience in ways that benefited the entire local agricultural community. Similarly, Elena's Apache relatives had gradually accepted Marcus as someone who demonstrated genuine interest in learning about traditional ways of life rather than merely tolerating them for Elena's sake. Marcus's patient approach to acquiring new knowledge and his obvious devotion to Elena's well-being earned him cautious but growing respect from community elders. The pregnancy proceeded smoothly through the summer months, with Elena maintaining good health while gradually reducing her most physically demanding work responsibilities. Marcus spent increasing amounts of time learning about childcare, infant nutrition, and the practical requirements of preparing his farmhouse to accommodate a baby. Both Elena and Marcus attended parenting classes together, though their situation as unmarried partners from different cultural backgrounds sometimes drew curious attention from other participants. Elena's confident approach to explaining their partnership as a practical arrangement focused on preserving important knowledge helped deflect most inappropriate questions while educating others about Apache ceremonial traditions. Marcus found the parenting classes both informative and anxiety-provoking. Learning about infant care requirements and child development stages made fatherhood feel more real, but also more daunting. Elena's calm confidence about their ability to successfully raise children helped balance Marcus's tendency toward worried overthinking about potential problems. In late August, Elena began teaching Marcus basic Apache songs and stories that their child would need to learn as part of their ceremonial education. The language lessons challenged Marcus's linguistic abilities, but Elena's patient instruction helped him develop enough familiarity with Apache phrases and concepts to participate meaningfully in his child's cultural education. Learning Apache songs is harder than learning irrigation techniques, Marcus admitted after struggling with a particularly complex ceremonial chant. But I can see why these traditions are so important to preserve. The connection between the songs and the land is really beautiful. Elena appreciated Marcus's genuine effort to understand Apache cultural practices rather than merely tolerating them. Our child will need to feel equally comfortable in both worlds, speaking Apache during ceremonies and discussing crop rotation at farmers markets. Having you learn these traditions alongside them will help demonstrate that both cultural backgrounds are equally valuable. As autumn approached and Elena's due date drew closer, both households prepared for the arrival of their first child. Marcus converted his spare bedroom into a nursery that reflected both Apache and farming traditions, with dream catchers sharing wall space with pictures of farm animals and hand-carved toys made from local desert wood. Elena's house was similarly prepared with traditional items that would help welcome the new baby into the Apache community. She had gathered sacred plants for cleansing ceremonies and prepared ceremonial clothing that would be used for the child's naming ceremony and other important cultural events. October brought the first contractions, and Elena's labor began on a clear desert morning when the autumn air carried the earthy scent of recently harvested fields. Marcus drove Elena to the hospital in Flagstaff, feeling nervous but determined to provide whatever support she needed during the birthing process. The labor proceeded normally, though Marcus found the experience more emotionally intense than he had anticipated. Watching Elena work through contractions with quiet determination gave him new appreciation for her strength and courage. After 8 hours of labor, Elena delivered a healthy daughter who immediately demonstrated the strong lungs and active temperament that would characterize her personality. Sarah Desba Thompson-Yazzie entered the world just after sunset on October 15th, weighing 7 pounds and displaying the dark hair and olive skin that suggested she would physically reflect both sides of her heritage. Marcus felt overwhelmed with emotion as he held his daughter for the first time, understanding finally why people described parenthood as life-changing in ways that couldn't be adequately explained in advance. Elena recovered quickly from delivery and seemed to transition naturally into motherhood, nursing baby Sarah with the same calm confidence she brought to all her other responsibilities. Marcus felt more uncertain about his parenting abilities, but Elena's patient guidance helped him learn to change diapers, prepare bottles, and comfort their daughter when she cried. The first weeks of parenthood challenged both Marcus and Elena to develop new routines that accommodated Sarah's needs while maintaining their respective work responsibilities. Marcus reduced his farming activities to focus on helping with childcare, while Elena extended her maternity leave to establish nursing patterns and begin Sarah's cultural education. Apache tradition required that Sarah be formally welcomed into the community through a naming ceremony conducted by tribal elders. The ceremony took place when Sarah was 6 weeks old, with Elena's extended family gathering to offer prayers and blessings for the new baby's health and spiritual development. Marcus participated in the naming ceremony as Sarah's father, wearing traditional clothing that Elena's aunt had helped him acquire. The ceremony was conducted in both English and Apache, allowing Marcus to understand the significance of the rituals while ensuring that Sarah received proper spiritual protection according to tribal customs. Today we welcome Sarah Desba into our community. The elder conducting the ceremony announced, "She carries the blood of her ancestors and the responsibility to preserve sacred knowledge for future generations. Her path will bridge different worlds, and she will need strength from both traditions to fulfill her destiny." The ceremony concluded with community members offering gifts and advice to both parents, acknowledging their joint responsibility for raising Sarah according to both Apache and farming traditions. Marcus felt deeply moved by the community's acceptance of him as Sarah's father and their recognition of his important role in her cultural education. Winter brought new challenges and discoveries as Marcus and Elena adapted to the rhythms of caring for an infant. Sarah proved to be an alert and curious baby who seemed equally interested in Apache lullabies and the sound of tractors working in nearby fields. Elena began teaching Sarah simple Apache words while Marcus introduced her to the sights and sounds of farm life. By Sarah's first Christmas, both parents had developed confidence in their parenting abilities and had established routines that allowed them to balance childcare with their professional responsibilities. Elena had returned to part-time work with the Tribal Environmental Department, while Marcus had reorganized his farming operation to accommodate frequent interruptions for diaper changes and feeding schedules. The unconventional partnership that had begun with Elena's bold proposal had evolved into a functional family unit that served both parents' needs while providing Sarah with rich cultural foundations from both sides of her heritage. Marcus had discovered that fatherhood suited his nurturing personality perfectly, while Elena had successfully begun the process of preserving her family's ceremonial knowledge for another generation. As spring returned to the desert, bringing with it Sarah's first birthday and the beginning of her second year, both Marcus and Elena looked toward the future with optimism and determination. They had proven that love could take many forms and that family could be created through shared commitment to preserving important traditions and raising children with strong cultural identities. Sarah Desba Thompson Yazzie would grow up bilingual in English and Apache, equally comfortable in ceremonial settings and agricultural environments, carrying forward both the ancient wisdom of her Apache ancestors and the practical knowledge of desert farming that had sustained her father's family for generations. The bold experiment that had begun with Elena's unexpected proposal had created exactly the kind of bridge between cultures that both parents had hoped to achieve. Standing in his fields on Sarah's first birthday, watching his daughter take her first tentative steps while Elena sang traditional Apache songs, Marcus felt grateful for the courage Elena had shown in approaching him with her unusual request. Their partnership had given him the family life he had always dreamed of while providing Elena with the means to preserve her grandmother's sacred legacy. The future stretched ahead full of possibilities and challenges, but Marcus and Elena faced it together, united by their shared commitment to raising a daughter who would carry forward the best of both worlds while creating her own unique path through life. The shy farmer and the determined Apache woman had found in each other exactly what they needed to fulfill their deepest hopes for family, cultural preservation, and meaningful partnership.